Before we get started, hit the comments and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is over there. Whether you're catching sunrise in Nairobi, burning midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to hear from you. Don't just watch silently, let me know where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the jagged rooftops of Marlow, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. In a quiet alley behind the rusted shutters of a small market, the man thought she was alone, fragile, defenseless. He reached toward her, a cruel smirk playing across his face, certain of his power. Her breath was steady, almost serene, as if she had expected him all along. Then her hand shot out, grabbing his wrist with a strength that cracked bones. He staggered back, disbelief etched across his face. Her eyes, dark and unyielding, didn't show fear. She was small, almost delicate-looking, draped in black, hair tied back, but every movement radiated precision. The way she twisted his arm and pinned him to the wall was fluid, practiced, terrifying. "Wrong move," she whispered, her voice calm but cold as steel. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she circled him, eyes flicking to every escape route, every potential weapon in the alley. He realized then, she wasn't the helpless widow he'd imagined. She was something far more dangerous. Memories flared in her mind, late nights in the gym, hours in freezing rain, the screams of instructors pushing her body past exhaustion. Combat drills, tactical evasion, weapon handling, all burned into her muscle memory. She had buried this life behind grief and solitude, waiting for a moment like this. The man struggled, panic rising as his bravado crumbled. The subtle, almost imperceptible movements she made, the angle of her wrist, the shift of her weight, weren't random. Every micromotion was calculated, lethal. He had underestimated her because of her widow's veil, her quiet mourning, her soft eyes that hid storms. A sudden, sharp crack echoed as she forced him to the ground. The alley seemed to shrink around him, walls pressing closer, shadows deepening. The taste of dust filled his mouth, mingled with the sudden, icy terror of facing someone he thought he could dominate. His mind raced. He had thought her grief was weakness, her silence submission. He had never been more wrong. And then she spoke again, almost gently, but every word was a promise. "Touch me again and you won't leave this alley the same way." His legs shook and for the first time in his life he begged, not for mercy but for escape. The widow's calm presence was suffocating, suffused with the weight of unseen battles fought and won. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply stood, letting him process the truth. He had played a predator to the wrong prey. As he scrambled backward, humiliated and shaken, she vanished into the growing darkness, silent as a shadow, leaving him alone with the echo of his own fear. The man's arrogance had shattered in minutes. And somewhere deep in the alleys of Marlow, the widow knew this was only the beginning. Rain had turned the streets of Marlow into a slick mirror of flickering neon lights. Inside a small, dimly lit apartment above a shuttered bakery, Celine Marlow, the widow, stood by the window watching the alley below. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from the old, familiar tension that came with remembering what she had survived. She pressed a finger to the cold glass, tracing the raindrops as if they could erase the past. 3 years ago her life had been ordinary. A loving husband, quiet evenings, laughter spilling through the rooms of their home. Until the night everything changed. A sudden explosion tore through the quiet of their suburban neighborhood. Smoke and fire replaced laughter. Celine had watched her husband, the love of her life, fall in her arms, leaving her world hollowed out. The police called it a tragic accident. But she had knew the truth was darker and that ordinary justice would never touch it. Grief had almost broken her. 4 months she wandered through life as a ghost, wrapped in black, hiding her face from the world. But the widow's solitude was deceptive. Beneath her mourning veil she was forging a new life, one tempered in discipline, honed in secrecy. By day she was the grieving widow neighbors pitied. By night she returned to the gym where her late husband had trained her, mastering techniques that would once have seemed impossible for someone her size. Martial arts, tactical defense, hand-to-hand combat, precision strikes, and the cold logic of survival. Her body learned, muscle by muscle, memory by memory. She learned to anticipate, to read subtle movements, to sense danger before it fully appeared. Each bruise, each cut, each aching joint was a testament to her growing resolve. Fear became her ally, grief her teacher, and rage her fuel. And yet, she remained invisible. People saw a fragile woman, but Celine's mind was a battlefield, sharpened for the moment when the world would underestimate her. Tonight, that world had arrived in the alley. The man, Slick, arrogant, thinking her defenseless, had assumed the role of predator. And for a fleeting moment she let him believe he was in control. But control was an illusion, a tool she had learned to exploit. Every feint he made, every threat, every smirk she had catalogued in her mind. She had learned patience in her grief, the quiet art of waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As rain dripped from the eaves, her gaze hardened. Celine knew that encounters like tonight would become tests, not just of strength but of judgment, courage, and strategy. Each misstep could cost her dearly, and each victory reminded her of her husband's last whispered advice. Train your mind as fiercely as your body. Never let the world forget you exist. A soft knock at the door pulled her from memory. She moved swiftly, silently, like a shadow across the floor, checking locks and listening. Danger often came dressed as normalcy, she reminded herself. Her heart beat in precise rhythm, conditioned from years of training. Tonight, she had not only defended herself, she had reminded the world that beneath the veil of mourning, a storm was waiting. Celine exhaled slowly, letting the tension ease just enough to smile. The man had left, but she knew he would not forget. Neither would the next nor the one after. And neither would she. The morning fog hung low over the outskirts of Marlow, curling around cracked fences and abandoned warehouses. Celine walked silently along the deserted streets, her black coat brushing the damp ground, eyes sharp, ears tuned to every whisper of movement. Her life had become a careful choreography, one misstep, and the fragile balance she maintained could shatter. Inside her apartment, she had a small, hidden corner filled with maps, surveillance photos, and notes detailing the comings and goings of the city's underworld. Each figure she marked was a potential threat, each alley a possible battleground. But she was not alone. Though most believed she existed only in mourning, a few trusted allies remained from her husband's military network. Private contractors, retired soldiers, and old friends from covert missions quietly watched over her, respecting her secrecy while providing unseen support. That morning she met with one of them, an older man named Elias Cade. He had served with her husband years ago, his graying hair tucked under a worn cap, eyes sharp as a hawk's. They spoke in whispers over the clattering din of a small diner, careful not to draw attention. "You're pushing yourself too far," he warned, sliding a folded envelope across the table. "You can't fight the world alone." Celine's fingers brushed the paper, tensing. Inside were recent intelligence reports. The man from the alley was part of a larger syndicate, a group that preyed on those they thought weak. Every move he made was calculated, backed by people who underestimated no one. "I know," she replied, voice low but unwavering. "I'm not fighting alone. But I won't wait for them to strike first." As Elias left, Celine's mind drifted back to the alley, to the man who had thought her defenseless. The memory still burned with a quiet satisfaction. The surprise, the fear in his eyes, the realization that he had misjudged her completely. And yet, a shadow lingered, the sense that this encounter was only the beginning. Her widow's veil had shielded her, but the world would continue testing her, each challenge sharper than the last. Returning to her apartment, Celine began another round of training. Punches struck with precision, kicks snapped like whips, and her body moved through the sequences she had honed in darkness and solitude. Each strike was a release of grief, rage, and determination. The mirror reflected not the widow, but the warrior she had become, and she allowed herself a small, grim smile. She paused mid-motion, eyes narrowing as the phone vibrated softly on the counter. A text appeared, "They know. Move fast. Trust no one." No signature, no sender. Just urgency, and the unspoken truth that someone had noticed her intervention in the alley. Someone was watching, tracking, waiting. Celine's pulse quickened. This wasn't about random street violence anymore. This was personal. Her life, once quiet and predictable, had been pulled into a web of danger she had only glimpsed in shadows. And now she would have to navigate it fully awake, fully prepared, or risk losing everything she had fought to protect. She glanced at the rain-streaked window, the city sprawled beneath her. Somewhere out there, the predators thought she was just a widow. They had no idea the storm waiting for them was already sharpening its edge. The city smelled of smoke and wet asphalt, a lingering reminder of chaos just beneath its polished surface. Celine navigated the narrow streets with practiced caution, hood pulled low, ears alert to every distant footstep. The text had rattled her mind, "They know. Move fast. Trust no one." Whoever was watching had eyes everywhere, and that realization set her nerves on edge. 3 years earlier, before her husband's death, She had been trained not only to defend herself but to survive impossible odds. Her mornings began before sunrise with calisthenics, her afternoons filled with tactical drills, weapon handling and hand-to-hand combat. Nights were for memorizing city layouts, planning escape routes, anticipating threats, and reading people like open books. The skills had been a hidden inheritance, one her husband left behind intentionally, knowing life was unpredictable, cruel, and often fatal. Now the training was not just theory, it was survival. She moved silently along the alleys, past shuttered shops and broken streetlights, imagining every potential trap. In the shadows, figures shifted, watching, measuring. The syndicate she had inadvertently challenged thrived in the city's underworld, predators who preyed on the vulnerable, powerful men who assumed fear could be bought or broken. Her presence in the alley had shattered that assumption and word spread fast. Celine ducked into a narrow courtyard, checking the perimeter, listening to the faint hum of neon above. A flashback hit her, a memory of her husband correcting her stance, his hands firm, his voice calm. Never let the world decide your limits. Anticipate their every move before they even know they're moving. Those words had become law in her life. Every alley, every encounter, every whispered threat now played out in her mind like a tactical map. A black SUV crept past the entrance to the courtyard, engine purring softly. Celine's hand moved to the hidden knife strapped inside her coat. She crouched, invisible, her pulse steady, eyes scanning the driver and passenger. She recognized them instantly, not their names but the aura of controlled menace, the way danger clung to their movements. These were syndicate operatives, shadows moving in daylight, predators trained to detect weakness. Celine allowed herself a moment to smile grimly. The widow they thought was fragile was watching, waiting, and prepared. She had trained for this, lived for this, and her husband's legacy gave her a clarity most never achieved. And yet, a flicker of unease brushed her spine. This confrontation was no longer incidental. They had come with intent, and intent carried consequences. She slipped into the shadows, moving along the fire escape, heart steady, every muscle coiled for action. Tonight would not be a fight of brute force but of wits, precision, and anticipation. The city below throbbed with life, oblivious to the silent war unfolding in its alleys and rooftops. Every step she took, every breath, was calculated, a message to the predators who underestimated her. She is not what she seems. And somewhere in the distance, the first signs of the syndicate's deeper interest began to surface. Celine didn't know their full plan yet, but she did know one truth. The widow they had dismissed as helpless was no longer just defending herself, she was hunting. The alley was silent, almost oppressively so, as Celine crouched behind a stack of crates, rain-slicked concrete reflecting the pale glow of distant streetlights. Every instinct screamed caution, every nerve alert to movement. The syndicate had made their first direct approach, and she could feel the weight of their intent like a storm pressing in on all sides. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, a man with broad shoulders, the one who had reached for her weeks ago, now flanked by two more. They moved with confidence, thinking fear would bend her to their will. They didn't know her, didn't know what the loss of everything could forge. In her mind, she replayed combat drills, hand sequences, exit strategies, every detail honed in endless nights of silent training. The first man lunged, confident, underestimating her size, underestimating her resolve. Celine pivoted with fluid precision, sidestepping his grasp, twisting his wrist, forcing him into a painful arc against the crates. The second lunged from the side, knife in hand. She caught his wrist midair, using his momentum to fling him into the alley wall. The sound cracked through the night, bone, leather, and shock. Pain, fear, and disbelief painted the attackers' faces. Celine's presence was a shockwave. They had thought her vulnerable, fragile. She moved like a shadow, silent, deliberate, each strike a whisper of fury and skill. She was not just defending herself, she was sending a message. No one would mistake her again. Rain streaked across her face, mixing with the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She ducked under a wild swing, flipping an attacker onto the wet ground, boots sliding against slick concrete. The alley had become a battleground, echoing with grunts, splintering crates, and the low hum of distant traffic. For a moment, time slowed. She saw every angle, every threat, every chance for victory. Then the final man, a taller, leaner shadow, lunged with reckless aggression. Celine sidestepped, grabbed him with a lock she had practiced thousands of times, and forced him to the ground. His confidence shattered as he realized he was no match. "Do you see now?" she whispered, her voice low, deadly calm. "Do not touch what isn't yours." Do not test the wrong widow. They scrambled backward, fear now plain in their eyes, dignity replaced by desperation. One of them whispered into a comm device, likely signaling reinforcements, but Celine didn't wait. She vanished into the darkness, moving silently to higher ground, watching their retreat. The storm in her mind mirrored the storm above, the rain, the thunder, the chaos, but she was in control. Back on the rooftop, she allowed herself a slow breath, letting the adrenaline ebb. Her heart still raced, but her mind was clear. Tonight had been a warning, not just to them but to the rest of the city's predators. The widow they thought weak had risen, fierce and unyielding. As she gazed over Marlowe's glistening streets, her phone buzzed again. Another message, no sender. Asterisk, they're planning bigger. They won't stop. Asterisk. Celine's jaw tightened. This was far from over. The first strike had been a test. The real storm was yet to come. And she would be ready. The city had gone quiet under a low-hanging fog as if holding its breath. Celine perched on a fire escape overlooking the district where the syndicate's influence ran deep. Every shadow seemed alive, every flicker of movement a potential threat. Her phone buzzed again, another anonymous message. Asterisk, tonight they come for more than a warning. Be ready. Asterisk. Her mind raced, tracing connections like threads on a spider's web. The man from the alley was just a pawn. Someone higher orchestrated these attacks, someone patient, calculating, aware that she had emerged from tragedy stronger, sharper, unpredictable. This was no random street violence. This was a carefully plotted campaign. Celine's thoughts drifted briefly to her husband. He had always warned her that true danger wasn't visible. It hid behind smiles, titles, even law-abiding facades. Always watch the ones who seem safe, he had said. Asterisk, they are the ones who will surprise you. Asterisk, those words now guided her as she scanned the rooftops and alleys below, imagining the syndicate's hierarchy like a tree, roots hidden deep, branches striking everywhere. Inside a nearby safe house, she spread out intelligence she had quietly gathered over the past weeks. Photos, notes, snippets of overheard conversations, every detail catalogued meticulously. She identified 3 key players: the local enforcer, a man known only as Cade; the strategist, someone meticulous, always 2 steps ahead; and the figure who pulled the strings, the one she had yet to see, who controlled the syndicate with invisible hands. Celine studied each carefully, calculating risk, predicting moves. She understood patterns now, the subtle signals, the way threats escalated, the timing of attacks. And she realized something chilling. The syndicate was testing her, probing for weaknesses. But in doing so, they underestimated her ability to anticipate, to strike first when the time was right. A sudden noise outside the safe house snapped her back to the present. Celine slipped into the shadows, her senses heightened, eyes scanning the fog for movement. 2 men approached cautiously, guns holstered but fingers twitching near triggers. She recognized them from prior encounters, their confidence now tempered with wariness. They didn't know she was watching, waiting. In moments the fight began, not chaotic but precise. Celine moved like water, using their momentum against them, subduing them silently, efficiently. The alley became a silent testament to her training. Within minutes, both men were incapacitated, sprawled on the wet cobblestones, confusion and fear etched on their faces. She left no trace of her presence, only the realization that the widow they had underestimated was far more than they could handle. As she returned to the safe house, Celine's mind churned. This was no longer survival, it was strategy, anticipation, and preparation for the inevitable confrontation with the mastermind behind the syndicate. Each move, each encounter brought her closer to the truth. The widow they dismissed as fragile would decide the rules of engagement from now on. Her eyes hardened as she studied the map on the wall. The city was a chessboard and she had learned to play from the shadows. The web was tightening, but so was her grip. The streets of Marlowe were alive with a deceptive calm, the kind that hid the sharp teeth of danger. Celine moved along the rooftops, boots silent against slick tiles, eyes scanning for movement in the alleys below. Every corner, every shadow now held intent. The syndicate's pawns had grown bolder, their aggression sharper. They had realized the widow wasn't just defending herself. She was dismantling their operations. She paused at the edge of a rooftop, studying a dimly lit courtyard where 2 figures waited. Cade, the local enforcer, and another subordinate, both armed, were ready this time. But Celine didn't rush. Her training, her grief, her years of quiet preparation, all sharpened into lethal patience. She recalled the nights of isolation, the endless drills, the silent promise to herself that no one would ever dominate her again. Her strategy was simple: turn their aggression into their weakness. She dropped silently behind a stack of crates, rolling into shadow, letting the night swallow her presence. Cade lifted his gun, scanning, unaware that Celine had anticipated his every movement. With a quick, fluid motion, she disarmed him, twisting his wrist, forcing him to the ground with precision. The subordinate lunged next, but she used his momentum to send him sprawling into the brick wall, dust and rain spraying across the courtyard. The fight was swift, almost surgical, yet it carried an undercurrent of rage, anger at those who believed they could prey on the vulnerable, at those who mistook mourning for weakness. Each move, each strike, was a message. The widow's grief had been transformed into steel, into strategy, into unyielding force. But the skirmish was more than physical. Celine sensed another presence, someone watching, calculating, orchestrating. Her instincts screamed that the mastermind behind the syndicate had noticed her interference. This realization tightened her chest. The game was changing. She was no longer just defending herself. She was bait in a high-stakes hunt. She retreated to higher ground, scanning the city below. Somewhere in the darkness, the shadow of her unseen adversary loomed, pulling strings, directing pawns, testing her limits. A soft vibration in her coat drew her attention. Another anonymous message. Asterisk, you're too close. Step lightly or lose everything. Asterisk. Celine's mind sharpened. The widow they thought helpless was now a calculated threat, ready to strike first if necessary. But she knew she couldn't act recklessly. Every move must be deliberate, precise, and unseen. Every misstep could be fatal. She allowed herself a fleeting glance at the horizon. The city stretched before her, lights glinting like distant stars, unaware of the silent war unfolding above its streets. For the first time since her husband's death, Celine felt the full weight of responsibility. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore, she was defending the fragile, the overlooked, the prey that others would have exploited. Her grief had been transformed into a weapon, her solitude into armor. And yet, the shadow behind the syndicate's orders was growing, waiting for her to falter. She exhaled slowly, tension coiling in her shoulders. The hunter had become the hunted, but Celine Marlowe did not flee. She waited. She calculated. She prepared. And when the time came, the widow who had been underestimated would strike harder than anyone imagined. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Marlowe loomed like a silent predator, its shattered windows reflecting the faint glow of streetlights. Celine approached cautiously, the night wind carrying the scent of rust and oil. Every muscle was coiled, every nerve alert. This was the place the syndicate had chosen to lure her. Intentional, calculated, designed to test her limits. Inside, shadows stretched across the cracked concrete floor. Crates stacked haphazardly created a maze of cover. Celine's heart beat steadily, trained to resist fear, yet she felt the weight of anticipation. Cade's absence here was notable. The mastermind himself was likely present, watching, orchestrating, ensuring every angle was controlled. A soft click echoed. Celine froze, senses straining. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall, commanding, eyes sharp with calculating intelligence. This was the architect behind the syndicate, the one who had ordered attacks, manipulated pawns, and underestimated the widow entirely. He smiled faintly as though expecting her. "I've heard about you," he said, voice smooth, calm, almost taunting. "The widow who thinks she's a warrior." Celine's fingers tightened around the edge of her knife. "You thought I was weak," she replied, voice low but unwavering. "You were wrong." Every lesson she had learned, every hour of training, every memory of loss converged in this moment. Her grief had been sharpened into precision, her sorrow into strategy. The man advanced, signaling two masked enforcers from behind crates. Celine moved immediately, fluid and deliberate, dispatching the first with a sweep kick that sent him crashing against the wall. The second lunged with a knife. She caught his wrist midair, twisting sharply, forcing him to the ground with a precise strike that left him stunned and writhing. The mastermind's smile faltered, just for a second. He hadn't expected her to handle multiple attackers simultaneously with such efficiency, nor had he anticipated her calm in the chaos. Celine's eyes narrowed. "This ends tonight," she whispered, moving with a predator's grace, closing the distance between them. He backed toward a steel beam, realizing too late that she controlled the space now. Each step she took was measured, every strike anticipated. When he lunged, she sidestepped, using his momentum to force him into a crate, the wood splintering under the impact. He gasped, eyes wide with disbelief. "You underestimated grief," she said, voice echoing through the cavernous space. "You underestimated strength forged in loss." Her movements were precise, lethal, but she held back enough to send a warning. Her goal was survival and justice, not unnecessary killing. The enforcers lay incapacitated, groaning in pain, while the mastermind struggled to rise. Celine stood over him, her knife hovering near his chest. She could see the fear now, the recognition that his carefully constructed empire was fragile, vulnerable, toppled by the one he had dismissed. The warehouse was silent again, save for the distant hum of the city. Celine's chest rose and fell steadily. The widow had not only survived the trap, she had turned it against them, demonstrating that every lesson, every night of training, and every scar from the past had prepared her for this moment. The night was electric, heavy with the scent of rain and smoke. Celine crouched atop the skeletal remains of an abandoned building overlooking the syndicate's central hub, a sprawling complex of steel and shadows. Every detail of the city below had been memorized. Entrances, patrols, hidden cameras, escape routes. Tonight was not about defense, it was about ending this nightmare. Inside the complex, the mastermind regrouped, flanked by his most loyal enforcers. Cade limped, bruised and furious but alive, determined to see Celine fall. The mastermind's eyes burned with contempt. He had underestimated her before. He would not make that mistake again. But Celine had anticipated every contingency, every guard rotation, every trap laid for her. She moved silently along the beams, rain slicking her boots, muscles coiled like springs. The first challenge came in the form of a corridor filled with guards. Celine flowed like shadow and wind, using precise, lethal strikes honed from years of disciplined training. Each opponent fell swiftly, incapacitated without sound. She felt the rhythm of the fight, the hum of adrenaline, the heartbeat of strategy. No hesitation, no mercy for those who underestimated her. Reaching the inner chamber, the mastermind waited, expression calm but dangerous. "I hoped it wouldn't come to this," he said, voice echoing off concrete walls. "But you leave me no choice." Behind him, a network of armed men tensed, ready to end her. Celine's gaze hardened. For a heartbeat, she allowed herself a flash of grief, memories of her husband, of all she had lost, all she had fought through. Then it transformed into focus, the quiet, deadly clarity that had carried her this far. The confrontation erupted. Celine moved with brutal elegance, turning their combined aggression against them. Each strike, block, and maneuver flowed with lethal precision. Her knife flashed in the dim light, her body twisted and struck with controlled fury. Guards fell like dominoes, confusion and panic overtaking their coordinated aggression. The mastermind lunged, but Celine sidestepped, using his momentum to pin him against steel beams. "Do you see now?" she demanded, voice low but carrying the weight of every wound and every loss. "You cannot underestimate grief. You cannot underestimate strength born from loss. I am not your victim." The mastermind faltered, fear creeping into his eyes, the first true emotion since the syndicate's empire had begun. Cade, broken and humiliated, scrambled to help, but Celine's resolve was absolute. Every strike had a purpose, every move an undeniable message. The widow had become a force they could not comprehend, let alone defeat. By the time the last enforcer lay unconscious, the room was silent except for Celine's steady breathing. The mastermind knelt, defeated, realizing his control was gone. Celine lowered her knife, letting him understand that justice, not vengeance, was her ultimate weapon. Rain fell outside, splattering against broken windows. Celine stepped back, scanning the room, absorbing the enormity of what had been accomplished. Her city was safer tonight, her husband's memory honored, and her grief transformed into something formidable: strength, resilience, and undeniable courage. The first light of dawn crept over Marlow, painting the city in soft gold and pink. Celine stood atop the roof where she had spent countless nights surveying, training, and planning. Below, the streets were calm, unaware of the battle that had raged in the shadows. The syndicate had crumbled, its mastermind cornered, and the enforcers left broken and humiliated. Justice had been delivered, not with vengeance but with precision and unwavering resolve. Her heart still beat steadily, but the storm that had lived within her for years finally eased. She had faced fear, grief, and overwhelming odds, and she had emerged unbroken. Memories of her husband surfaced, the warmth of his smile, the quiet encouragements, the gentle hands that had once guided her through her first combat drills. She whispered his name softly into the morning air, feeling both sorrow and pride. The city below slowly awakened. Celine descended from the rooftop, moving through the streets with the calm assurance of someone who had claimed her place in the world. The widow's veil was gone, not physically but metaphorically. She was no longer defined by loss or vulnerability. Her grief had been the crucible that forged her into something stronger, sharper, unstoppable. Back in her apartment, she checked the maps and notes one final time. The syndicate's network was dismantled, their plans exposed, and law enforcement now had the evidence to ensure they could not rise again. Celine allowed herself a small smile, a rare moment of quiet triumph. She had protected the city, honored her husband and claimed her strength, not as a widow but as a warrior. A soft knock at her door startled her. She approached cautiously, hands ready, but relaxed when she saw a familiar face. Elias Cade, her ally from the early days. "They won't be back," he said simply, respect and relief in his eyes. "You've done what few could." Celine nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in years, the burden of grief was tempered by the satisfaction of justice fulfilled. Stepping onto the balcony, she breathed deeply, feeling the morning breeze wash over her. Marlow was alive, vibrant, and unaware of the quiet battle that had safeguarded its streets. Celine's gaze turned to the horizon, determination and peace intertwined. She had fought, survived and conquered, not just enemies but the haunting shadows of her past. The widow had transformed, grief tempered into a weapon, loss honed into clarity, and solitude reshaped into resilience. Celine Marlowe was no longer defined by tragedy, she was defined by strength, courage and the unshakable truth that no one, not grief, not predators, not even death itself, could ever break her again. As the sun fully rose, painting the city in golden light, Celine allowed herself a rare smile. She was ready for whatever came next. The world might still underestimate her, but she no longer cared. She had claimed her power, reclaimed her life, and proven that the strongest warriors are often the ones the world assumes are helpless. The city was hers to protect, her grief a shield, her skills an unspoken warning. And for the first time in years, Celine felt free.